Morning, everyone. Welcome back to Citizen by CNN. What Next America? I'm Dana Bash, and as you can see, I'm joined by my friends and colleagues, David Chalian, John King, and Abby Phillip. It's hard to believe that last week we were doing this very thing just hours before the insurrection on Capitol Hill. And of course, there's so many questions that you all have coming to us about that, about the continued threat of violence in this country ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration next week. And so we're going to try to answer as many of your questions today as possible. And you can continue to submit them in the box to the right of your screen. But let's get right to the questions. And we're going to start with impeachment. And the first question is, throughout our history, America has seen few turbulent times such as these. Since Biden is about to be sworn in, how is impeachment supposed to heal the country and help us move on? David, I'll start with you.
It's a really good question, and there are some concerns, even among some Democrats, that impeachment is a divisive political process by nature, and that this could indeed thwart the sort of out of the gate beginning of the Biden administration in a completely holistic message to the country about healing and being united. That being said, it is clear this train is leaving the station in the House. Overwhelming majority of Democrats on Capitol Hill want to pursue this, irrespective of what may happen with the trial in the Senate. And there is an argument that is being made here, which is we can talk about healing and reconciliation once there is accountability in place here. And that's the piece that the Democrats are sort of pushing back on when Republicans are instantly saying, oh, this is going to divide the country again. It's divide the country. Where is the constitutionally prescribed accountability method when one branch incites an insurrection, murderous riot on another co-equal branch of government? That process is impeachment. That is the process in the Constitution for that kind of accountability. And so the Democrats want to move forward with that and then get to what you're saying, the healing part. But that does not dissipate, Dana, Joe Biden's challenge. I mean, as we're living these days, yesterday, the inaugural committee announces the theme of his inauguration is America United. I mean, at a time when America has probably in our lifetime never been this divided. And so it is Joe Biden's challenge to deliver on that message, but Democrats on the Hill first want accountability for President Trump.
And John, I'm going to get to another question from a viewer, but as I do, I want to say that what I'm hearing from Republicans is maybe about don't divide us more, but it's also about the fact that if we do this, you're going to make Donald Trump even more of a martyr, and you're going to somehow make him into a person who can play the victim card. And on that, the second viewer question is, as for Republicans in the Senate, who is viewed as possibly voting to convict Trump on an article of insurrection?
Look, a lot of things can be true at once. We often say two things can be true at once. A lot of things can be true at once. And Democrats and all Americans should want accountability here, right? We want the people who broke the laws. We want the people now responsible for the rising death toll to face justice in a court of law. That's how we do it. Impeachment is the court of law for a president of the United States, even when there's only a week or 10 days left in his or her term. So it's a tough situation. To the question about the Senate, I think obviously, you look at the Mitt Romneys, you look at the Ben Sasses, you look at the Pat Toomey's, people who have said they'll look at what the House Democrats do. And I think it's important that the House Democrats have tried to keep this very simple and very focused. They're not going back, to Mueller issues. They mention in the article of impeachment some of the president's meddling, asking Georgia officials to help him cheat. But the crime, if you will, laid out in the charges, the impeachment charges, is inciting the insurrection. And look, anyone who hasn't seen it or read it, go back and look at what the president said at that rally. What he said about his own vice president, what he said about Congresswoman Cheney, what he said about don't be weak, what he said about storm the Capitol, what he said about we have to do this. It is what it is, and the president said what he said. So I do think you could have a handful, maybe more, Republicans in the Senate. I would say, even though it's a great question, I would add in the House. The House goes first. The House goes first. The House Republican leadership, the top two leaders, 130 plus House Republicans, even after the country was attacked. That's what happened at the Capitol. The country was attacked. The government was attacked. The life of the vice president-elect, the Speaker of the House, 530 other elected officials, and all of their hardworking staff were put at risk. We are, in some ways, it's a horrible word to yours, lucky. Lucky. Look at the all the equipment these people brought into the Capitol. This could have been much worse. It's horrible and horrific as it is. This could have been much more bloody and deadly. I'm really fascinated to see how many House Republicans either vote for impeachment or come forward with a reasonable alternative. Let them stand up and say the president should be censured. Let them stand up and say we would maybe vote to bar him from future office. I think what Liz Cheney said last night, the number 3 House Republican, is very interesting. She said this is a vote of conscience. She didn't say it was a vote of party. She didn't say it was a vote of principle. She said it was a vote of conscience. I take that as a green light, almost encouragement for some Republicans to step forward and say there needs to be accountability here. So we're going to have an impeachment debate, and then we are going to have a continued debate within the Republican Party over what to do about the Trump factor and who is willing to plant a long-term flag, even if he gets back on Twitter or somewhere else and starts attacking them, even if they go home and face polling that says, we don't like you for abandoning the president. What's more important, your political future or this moment in time? We're going to find that out over the next few days.
Yeah, and Abby, another viewer question is about the timing. Representative Clyburn suggests that perhaps it is best to delay Trump's trial in the Senate for 100 days so that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris can focus on pressing issues. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought that was interesting that he said that, and it sort of trying to problem solve the big issue, which is that Joe Biden is actually about to become president in a very rare position of having 0 cabinet members confirmed before he is inaugurated. So we forget, because we're in this crazy town, that in prior years, they would have had hearings about cabinet secretaries, especially in the national security realm, to try to get them ready so that when the president is inaugurated, they're ready to go. And there's not this sort of vacuum of leadership at significant cabinet positions. And Joe Biden is not in that position, in large part due to President Trump's refusal to move on from the election, and because of a lot of the activity that's been going on Capitol Hill with regard to the electoral count last week. So Joe Biden's in that position. They know that. They know they have to get moving on some of this stuff quickly. But I also thought that that suggestion by Whip Clyburn was actually kind of shot down pretty quickly by other Democrats in the House, who basically said, or in the Senate, who basically said, I don't think that that's a viable solution. And now what you're hearing about is them trying to split the day. You know, they can do the truth is they can do this now because they are going to have control over the Senate. If we were talking about a Mitch McConnell Senate, this would be impossible. The schedule would be determined by the Republicans. But with a Democrat as the majority leader in the Senate, they can try to find creative ways to move forward with nominees, move forward with legislation, while also holding a speedy impeachment hearing, potentially, but it's tricky. I mean, I think it's much more likely that they'll try to do that than that they will try to wait 100 days. It just does not seem feasible that waiting 100 days for a lot of reasons. One, I think logistically, it just doesn't seem like something that the Senate wants to do. And then secondly, I think momentum is really important here. We've gone about a week, a little less than a week since this horrific event. And I think the horror of what we all experience and what lawmakers experience on Capitol Hill is weighing on them, and it's contributing to this sense of urgency around needing to do something. So I think that for that reason also, the Democrats will want to try to do this as soon as possible, rather than waiting until 90 days has passed or 100 days has passed, and Republicans will be like, well, why are you even bothering to do this? We need to just move on at this point.
Yeah, and just when you say split the day, the trial would start in the afternoon, which it would usually just
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. If the past is any guide, and then the morning would be regular business. And so, David, another great question from our viewers is on the two most prominent Republican senators, Senator Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and then Congressman Brooks. And so the question is, what are the chances that they will be censured by their colleagues?
Well, we have some calls both in the House and in the Senate. I believe a resolution was introduced in the House. We heard Sherrod Brown talk about in the Senate trying to get them to resign or actually move forward with expulsion proceedings to expel them from the Senate. You know, I think it is always hard for Congress to punish its own. I think that's a really, we've seen time and again that doesn't sort of happen in quite the way that maybe the public would want or expect. I am less certain that there will be some kind of accountability measure, meaningful accountability measure for the Republicans who are part of this sedition caucus that aided and abetted the president's efforts here. I mean, just remember, I mean, we're talking about a majority of Republicans in the House with their leadership, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, after the attack, after the Capitol had been attacked, their own lives were threatened, their staff was threatened, and there was this total subverted, perverted view of democracy going on, and they still voted to challenge the electoral vote count that was taking place. So I would imagine with Democrats in control of the House, there will be some sort of notion to move forward with making a recognition of that. But I would be very surprised, Dana, if we end up that those folks actually sort of suffer real punishment. Though I will say this, then the punishment they may suffer, as John was saying, I mean, we are in a definitional moment of the post-Trump Republican Party. And I understand, as John was saying, where the polls are right now. Majority of Republicans, still believe that there was widespread fraud in the election. Majority of Republicans don't want to see Donald Trump removed from office. Majority of Republicans don't believe Donald Trump or Republicans in Congress deserve blame. So there's comfort for these Republicans in Congress who behaved anti-constitutionally here in many ways, that they have support at home. But what the Liz Cheneys of the world and others, again, it's not, I don't want to misrepresent. This is a small but slowly growing faction inside the Republican Party, taking all those conversations we've talked about here in our reporting that happened privately over the last 4 years and bringing them out publicly now, trying to set a course forward for the party. I do think that there may be a moment here where some Republican leaders actually look at that word leader, and instead of following where the voters are and something, try to lead the Republican Party voters to a new post-Trump place. And that may have an effect on how Cruz and Hawley are impacted. And I just want to add one more thing. I think the challenge is also going to be on us in the media here about how we cover these folks going forward. I mean, I sent an email to some colleagues, bosses of ours yesterday saying, so I don't understand, like, 2 months from now, Kevin McCarthy is going to hold a press conference attacking the Biden budget. And are we just going to be in this like normal world of like Kevin McCarthy criticized the Biden budget? Or is this now characterized like Kevin McCarthy, who supported an attack on the constitutional norms, is now attacking the Biden budget? I mean, I think what Cruz and Hawley have done on the Senate side, we have to forever make that part of our coverage and contextual understanding of who they are. And maybe the 2023, 2024 Republican presidential debate criteria should include that in your public life, you've never supported sedition. That's a requirement to get on the 2023, 2024 debate stage. I don't know, but I think we have some responsibility here that we don't just make this moment the political football of January 2024.
That's so well said. It's really important. And the problem is if you make that the criteria, the issue is that some people who vote in the Republican primary will not see it that way. They will see it as,
Of course,
doing what they think is right because they have been lied to by those members of Congress and, of course, the president for so long. Let's talk about the fact that there are still threats of violence here in this town and in capitals across the country. And John, this is for you. This viewer asks about being scared. says, I'm so scared about the next 9 days. Is there enough security on the 20th? Will there be
We
enough
hope so.
security?
We certainly hope so. And look, this town is rattled. The country is rattled. If you read the FBI bulletin, they say they are tracking conversations, and some of this is idle chatter and threats, but some of it is real. We now know how real it can be because of what happened here last week, because of what happened in the case of the people arrested who were threatening Governor Whitmer of Michigan back a few months ago. This is real. Some of it is just people venting and BSing online, but a lot of it now we know what can happen. Right, so you have to take it all seriously. And the FBI says it is monitoring traffic, that here in the Capitol, they expect more attacks. They anticipate more attacks. They believe that there will be armed people looking to instigate violence and trouble. And they also say they're hearing it about all 50 state capitals. Think about that. All 50 state capitals. Everybody in America has the right to be upset and the right to protest an election. Nobody in America has the right to commit a crime. And this is, again, back to the challenge of leadership. Will there be enough security? I hope so. Most of the people involved in this, there are investigations as to whether some people, in the Capitol Police, whether there was some inside job or some inside help. We need to let all that play out. But the overwhelming majority of the people involved in this are good public servants who are trying to keep everybody safe. Every parent in America right now is having tough conversations with their children. What the hell was this, right? And your kids can see it now in a way like never before. So we need to trust the security, and we need to wish them the best, and people need to cooperate. One of the reasons the Biden people are saying, stay at home. We're not planning big events here in Washington. Please watch online. The mayor of the District of Columbia, this is normally a big celebration, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is what makes America great. Thank you. We have a peaceful transfer of power, but we can't have that this time. We have to do it differently. We've all had to do a lot differently in the past year. This is going to have to be something else done at an incredibly tense time. But I want to come back to the point David was making, because this is also the challenge of leadership. Things get worse when leaders embrace lies. Things get worse when leaders are not willing to stand up to their own people and say no. No, and I'll just give you this one example. He was not a perfect man, but when that woman stood up to John McCain back in 2008 and said, I'm worried about Obama, he's a Muslim. What did McCain say? No, ma'am, he is not. We disagree on some things, but he is a good man with a good family. We disagree on issues. Let's leave it to that. That's what a leader does. Not say the election was stolen after court after court after court after court has thrown it out. So I think, to David's point, what Kevin McCarthy did, what Steve Scalise did, because they call themselves leaders, and what 138 plus of them, if they want to come forward and apologize, they have the opportunity. The American people are graceful, forgiving people, but they cannot be excused from what they did, because that is not leadership. Supporting what you know is a lie is fraud, not leadership, and that is part of the tense problem we're in. And it's why these people feel encouraged and emboldened. And some of them believe things because Trump tells them, and other leaders don't tell them it's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. Kevin McCarthy apparently said it to the president yesterday. Finally, stop. The election is over. But he needs to say it publicly every single day.
Dana, can I just add to that real quick?
Yeah.
Just because I do think, I've been thinking a lot about this, and hearing, counterterrorism experts talking about what we're facing as a country is somewhat unprecedented in a lot of ways. I mean, 50 state capitals is an almost insurmountable task to truly wrap your arms around what that threat really is. And I do think that there's a real problem in this country right now, between now and Inauguration Day, in which you have the leaders of the national security world, of the FBI, of other counterintelligence agencies completely silent on the nature and the scope of the threat and what they are doing about it. And it is not clear to me exactly why that is. I think some of it has to do with people just wanting to keep their heads down and not, cause any waves in these final days of the Trump administration, not unnecessarily provoke the president, who still is the president of the United States and has the power to get rid of any of them if he so chooses to. But that's a real problem, not just for public confidence, but it raises real questions about coordination, not just in Washington, where we have an inauguration happening, but at all of these state capitals where you need local officials and state officials to be fully aligned with federal officials about what is going on. I think just taking a step back and thinking about what was going on in Michigan with Governor Whitmer, and just the idea that since that threat was unveiled, there has been almost no sense that the federal government is digging deeper into these networks of radicalization domestically to find out who is behind them and what they are doing and what they are preparing for. It's not like they're not preparing. These militias all over the country are doing all kinds of things, and many of these same people showed up in Washington last week. And I do think that we should be really concerned that there's been a desire to downplay domestic terrorism in the last 4 years, certainly, but definitely in the last year. And in this next week, that failure to identify the threat and really take it seriously could come back to haunt us. And maybe it won't be in Washington because we know what happened last week and they're more prepared this time around. But the idea that all around the country, we don't really know who's behind this stuff and what exactly they're planning is something that should really concern us. And there should be a lot more accountability about where is the FBI briefing? Where is the acting attorney general? Where are all of these officials who are responsible for keeping this country safe, and why are they not being transparent about what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, a member of Congress said to me, imagine if the radicalization that we have seen over the past 4 years and what, blew up last Wednesday was not of people in America, but it was of people who were abroad. What if the person radicalizing them was somebody sitting in the Middle East, not sitting in the White House? We would be hearing about it nonstop. And I mean, that's a really important prism to look at it through. And because you said this, I want to bring up another viewer question, which is why? Why are we receiving so little information from law enforcement agencies about what happened and what is possibly happening and how they are going to be protecting us? John or David, do you want to take that? What do you think the answer to that question? And it's obviously the question Abby was posing as well.
Yeah, I think Abby raises a very important point. And on my show yesterday, Evan Perez, our great justice correspondent, made this very point that back last summer, then Attorney General Bill Barr and then FBI Director Christopher Wray had a press conference in which they went publicly after Antifa, saying that some of the violence across America during the protest was being encouraged by Antifa. I'm not here to get into the Antifa debate with people about whether they overstressed that or whether they were right to stress that. However, if they thought it was so important then to have a public meeting, right, a public on-camera briefing to tell people you need to be on alert about this. This is a problem in our country. Then where are they now? Now Bill Barr's obviously gone. But there's an acting attorney general, and I think part of it is what Abby said. They don't want to. If they're doing their job quietly and they think speaking out publicly would be counterproductive because the president would then come after them, I give some grace to that argument. However, we live in a democracy, and the public has the right to know. I was messaging with a state law enforcement official last night when I saw this FBI bulletin, who said actually the cooperation is pretty good, that there's a lot of information exchanging and that things are working behind the scenes pretty well. But I do think, to Abby's point, in a democracy, people need to hear that. We don't need to know the secrets. We don't need to know what they're tracking. They don't need to disclose their intelligence. We don't want to give away essentially what they know about the bad guys or the agitators out there. But there does need to be. We saw this after 9/11. We've seen this after horrific things. I think there does need to be more public face to this. And I think the why, the Capitol Police Chief just had to resign. There's an acting police chief. There's some transition because of events. There's transition because we're in this odd moment between administrations. But I do think it is absolutely critical that somebody find a way to have a public face to just give people reassurances, or if necessary, give them warnings and give them, markers of what you need to do in your behavior. And that's missing. And again, that's part of the leadership question. And it's missing right now.
Well, that's the leadership vacuum. I mean, Donald Trump is not on the job, and so everything flows down from that. And that is why we're not seeing. If Donald Trump was holding meetings in the Situation Room instead of admiring the television coverage of the riotous mob he incited, you would be seeing these briefings. But there's a total decision from Donald Trump to abdicate his responsibilities, long before noon on the 20th of January.
Right, and just very quickly, we've watched this play out for months when it comes to COVID. We've watched this play out for months when it comes to COVID. Look at the numbers. This president is AWOL. He doesn't want to do his job. He doesn't want to touch the hard stuff, and this one he won't touch at all.
And he's making stuff that shouldn't be hard, very hard, like the peaceful transition of power. You guys were talking about Antifa. I want to bring up another issue that a viewer wrote about, and that is, this is the question: double standards continue to be displayed in America. Will there be real talk regarding the difference in how these groups were treated? Do they feel an apology is needed to the Black Lives Matter supporters, to Black people?
That is so funny. That is so funny.
Jump ball.
Well,
An apology.
I'll take that one because
I'll
this
take
is something
reparations.
that, Dana, you and I and Jake, when we were on air during the insurrection, it's impossible to not notice the difference in what was going on in Washington on that day and what we all lived through last summer. I mean, if you live in DC, it's very apparent that last week there was what seemed to be almost no preparation for these massive, violent, riotous crowds. And over the summer, I could not get out of my head just this memory of going downtown on a Sunday evening. It was a beautiful day, a calm day, just trying to drive downtown and, go to places I would normally go. And you could not drive downtown in Washington without encountering armored vehicles because of a massive police presence and National Guard presence and alphabet soup of law enforcement from all over the country that had descended on Washington for basically nothing at that point. This was at a time when we eventually walked down to Black Lives Matter Plaza. People were out there dancing and rallying with each other, but it was peaceful. But the streets were shut down, and that's what happened last summer. That is not what happened last week. And I do think that there needs to be a reckoning about that. But it's not to say that. I think the objective here is to say that, yes, we should have a militarized Washington, D.C. to respond to every protest or to respond to everything that's going on in the city. I don't think anybody really wants that. I think that there's pretty widespread acknowledgement that what happened last summer was actually way overkill for what the nature of the threat was. However, there are some real questions about whether law enforcement did basic due diligence to determine whether there was a real threat of actual violence last week and whether they downplayed that threat because the alleged perpetrators were white. This was all over the internet. And as some of our law enforcement analysts have said, you don't need to be a rocket scientist or a CIA analyst to go on Twitter and find people talking about bringing guns to the Capitol. So if that's the case, why on earth did they not take it seriously? Why on earth did they think
inside job
definition?
Inside job.
We saw that that federal officials were discussing it as a quote unquote First Amendment protest up until the very last minute. That was not a First Amendment protest, and things were headed in a violent direction pretty early on. And that's the question for me: is when there's a real threat of violence, why was it not taken seriously? And then also when you watched the unfolding situation and you see just the incredible level of violence on the Hill. And I kept looking for hours and hours. It was like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and just seeing hundreds of people outside of the Capitol and absolutely no effort to contain them or to get them out of the perimeter. I've never seen anything like that at the Capitol before. Years ago, there was a woman who drove her car into a barricade at the Capitol and she was shot and killed with her baby in the back seat. And that day, I remember that day, you could not get anywhere near the Capitol. The entire perimeter was shut down. It is possible for Capitol Police to do that. Why they didn't do that, why they allowed protesters to just mill around for 6-7 hours until the curfew started is completely unacceptable. And it's not in keeping with basic practices. And it's certainly, obviously the contrast with last summer, it doesn't even need to be said. It's obvious that there was a difference in treatment.
I think
obviously.
to jump in quickly, I think that Abby makes a key point. So let's let's assume that they thought, as an extra precaution, they needed to do what they did last summer. Okay, just for the sake of argument, follow along here. And they had all those, militaristic SWAT teams essentially out blocking the United States Capitol. Okay, if you thought it was right then why was it not right now? What's the only difference? Right. That's why people need to do a lot of, and we went through this with the racial reckoning last summer. But if you need any more evidence that people in power need to have a conversation about how their brains work and how their reflexes work, those pictures tell the story. Because even if you want to side with law enforcement and say, as a precaution, they decided that was necessary last summer during the Black Lives Matter protest because those are members of Congress and we're going to go overboard. We're going to be extra safe. Okay. Well, then where was it last week? That is a question they can't answer because there's only one answer, and they need to be pushed on it.
Yeah, and I'll put a button on that and just say, as we were watching people scale the outside of the Capitol when this first started, I just kept thinking, imagine if those were people of color, the difference in response. And that's the sad truth that you're right, absolutely needs to be addressed. And hopefully this will be the next level in that reckoning. I want to get in some breaking news, guys. President Trump just made his first public comment as we were talking on his way to Texas, where he's going to go for a visit to the border. He told reporters that we want no violence, but called impeachment a, quote, continuation of the greatest witch hunt in the history of politics. That is pretty darn predictable. David?
Well, it certainly is that. It is predictable. And you see him going right back into the playbook that he used a year ago. I don't think he understands how dramatically different the context is for this impeachment than it was in the last impeachment. Never mind that maybe 10 or 20 House Republicans may end up supporting impeachment or not. We'll see how those numbers go. That is one piece that's different. But I don't think in that response that Donald Trump is doing anything other than putting this into the category of all-out battle. Now, he says violence shouldn't be condoned. What was the word he used, Anna? That violence should not be utilized?
He said, we want no violence.
We want no violence. That was not his message last Wednesday when he addressed the crowd. When Rudy Giuliani addressed the crowd, when his son addressed the crowd, that was not the message that set them up on their way to Capitol Hill to do what they did. So it doesn't, it rings so hollow and so inauthentic that, again, only his most ardent supporters, to whom he's been feeding misinformation as well as a larger ecosystem for years now, can actually listen to that and believe that. It just flies in the face of what his actions have been. And it shows that he thinks, I don't know what he thinks about impeachment. And again, it's not like the Senate is poised to remove him before January 20th. I think that's an unlikely outcome here. But he doesn't want to acknowledge the role, the note in history that will be the first part of his legacy, which is that he's going to be the first president of the United States ever to be twice impeached by the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and just like I keep looking up because I have TV monitors above me, and I keep watching to see how one of the things I'm tracking in recent days is how the different news networks cover certain stories, because certain people, we know there's a divide in viewership as well. To David's point, again, at this moment especially, but this president always tries to rewrite history and to escape any personal accountability for things. How about, I do not want any violence. I am asking anybody who supports me out there to stand down. He is the leader, of a lot of people who listen to him and follow him. If it is so important to him to criticize violence, this is not a moment for we or for vague statements or soft statements. It's a moment for him to step up and say, I am asking anyone who supports me to stand down and to recognize one of the treasures of our democracy. I lost. I'm leaving. Be an American. That's what he has to say at this moment, but he won't.
Abby, and as you answer, I just want to get one viewer question in that came in before, but it's very relevant. And it is, we have a moral obligation that if we see something that is wrong, we are to speak up. However, when we look back at the beginning from Charlottesville to Capitol Hill, How did we allow a president who has trampled upon our Constitution the permission to continue to where we are?
That is such a good question. And I think it's one that obviously needs to be posed to every Republican on Capitol Hill. And I mean every Republican, including the ones who today are condemning President Trump. And perhaps maybe the only exception might be like a Mitt Romney, who has been fairly consistent in his condemnation of President Trump. But the reality is that the behavior, there's a through line in the behavior, as this questioner very succinctly put it, between what happened in Charlottesville and what happened last week. It's the president's incitement and coddling of extremism. For the only reason that I can think of is that he believes that these people are his supporters, so he doesn't want to badmouth them or say anything negative about that. I mean, I will never forget the tweet that President Trump sent in the middle of the insurrection, in which he said, basically, this is what happens when you steal an election. That was this is what you get tweet in the middle of a violent insurrection on Capitol Hill. This is not a president who has remorse about his role in this process. And the problem is that Republicans have allowed this to continue by continually excusing the president's words and assuming that his words have no meaning and that they have no impact on the actions of his supporters, which has never been true, but it's certainly not true now. And then you, even to this day, have people like Senator Roy Blunt who are going out there and saying, well, he touched a hot stove, he'll never do it again. Well, he may never do it again because he's about to leave office in 8 days. But the reality is that President Trump does not recognize what happened here, does not recognize his role in it, and has absolutely no remorse over it. You know, right now, today, there was reporting that Kevin McCarthy, who seems to be trying to redeem himself in some way, he's the House Minority Leader, had a call with President Trump yesterday in which he tried to push back on this notion being pushed by President Trump that Antifa was behind the attacks. This is a president who is burrowing himself even deeper into conspiracy theories, even after what happened last week unfolded live on national television. Okay, there is no remorse. There is no recognition of wrongdoing here, and Republicans will not take a strong stance against it. He may not be removed. He's unlikely to be removed from office. He may not even be convicted in the Senate. Let's be honest. We may be pretty far from the 2/3 majority that's necessary to do that. And the reason for that is because Republicans on Capitol Hill, almost every single one of them, with very few exceptions, have been unwilling to actually condemn this president and make a very clear statement that there are consequences, that there needs to be a deterrent for this kind of behavior. This is not about going after President Trump. It's about making a statement, obviously, that what happened last week should never happen again by him or by any other individual in this country.
Dana, to the questioner's question about Charlottesville, I do want to just imagine a scenario for a moment, okay, where you are 8 months into the Trump administration. You're in August of 2017, and if the current response from Republicans, from corporate America, if the response to the president giving a pass to white supremacists and neo-Nazis in Charlottesville by both sides again, if in that moment the Republican Party stood up and stopped that, if corporate America stood up and said, anybody who doesn't denounce that doesn't get our money, if that happened in the first year of the Trump presidency, imagine perhaps a different course of history that could have been here. That didn't happen. And I think when the history books are written on this moment in American history, when they're written on January 6th, there's going to be a direct line from that moment when one of the major political parties in this country, the president's party, allowed him to give a pass to white nationalists, to white supremacists, and there is no bump in the road. That is a direct line, and they missed that moment.
So well said, and it was a great question. All right, we're going to do kind of a lightning round to get more questions in, and I will start with Abby and move down the line. Abby, can President Trump pardon mobs responsible for the Capitol riots?
Possibly. I think it is possible potentially for him to do that. But yeah, I mean, the truth is he can pardon whoever he wants. I think the question is, can he issue a blanket pardon that is unspecific to an individual? I think that's where it's a little bit less clear because, certainly he could try to pardon individuals who are responsible for this. But I think there's a real question about whether he can actually say anybody who was involved in what was going on in the Capitol would be pardoned. But I think, maybe I'm being naive here. I think that is not going to happen. I think that is not going to happen. I mean, we could talk about President Trump pardoning himself. I think that's a real possibility, but the likelihood that he will try to give sort of blanket immunity to everybody who was involved in this insurrection would be, it would be extraordinary and possibly impossible.
Okay, approximately how long is the impeachment process from beginning to end? Can the process be sped up due to the harshness of the outcome of the riot, John? I mean, we're seeing that now.
Congress can do whatever it wants, and we are seeing it happen in the sense in the House. The Democrats are going to skip the committee process. You're not going to have a Judiciary Committee. They're just going to have the Rules Committee put this on the floor, and they're going to vote probably on Wednesday. So that's fast track. That's as fast as you can go. The Senate, there are constitutional and Senate rules for you have to have a Senate trial. It is required to have a trial, but you can make rules for that trial to allow it to go very quickly. So yes, they could do this as quickly as they wish. They need to get the votes to do that. And so it'll be really interesting to watch. It will be Majority Leader Chuck Schumer making these decisions, most likely, even if the House finishes it while McConnell is still in charge. I think that's interesting, but they can write their own rules. There are some rules they have to follow, but on a basic timeline within those rules, as long as they have the votes, they can do it as quickly as they want.
And David, this is a really important question that we should hit on because we're talking about the trial happening after Joe Biden is president, and that is, can the president still be impeached after leaving office?
Right. I mean, I think he is going to be impeached before leaving office because, as John said, the House does the voting on impeachment, and that will happen tomorrow, most likely. But can he be removed in a trial? This is one of the arguments. One of the arguments that I believe, should there be an impeachment trial in the Senate, which I imagine there will be, that the president's legal team, whatever that legal team may be at that point, it certainly won't be the legal team that was defending him in the initial impeachment case, will make is this case. They're going to try to make an argument that you can't. Most constitutional scholars believe you can, that I have encountered, that there is, not on a presidential impeachment, but impeachments in states, there is some precedent here about having a trial, even though somebody has already left office. And remember, it's that vote to convict. If that were to take place, yes, the removal from office may be moot, but it's that second vote of then preventing Donald Trump from holding any future office that would be sort of the hot potato political issue in that moment, where there would be pressure for some folks to join that effort. That still has relevance even if Donald Trump has left office.
Yeah, and I was told by a senator, I think it was, that they have done impeachment trials for judges who had already resigned, but they want to make sure that they could never be picked again. Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm going to do one final question that you all can answer. Raising children in this time in our nation's history is a scary thing. I'm raising my son to take the time to draw his own conclusions based on the information he receives to make the best choices he can. With all of the misinformation and lies being thrown around, with all this chaos, what do you tell our children to attempt to ease their minds when it comes to the state of our political horizon?
Well, wow, two of us on this call are the parent of one child, and so we have the real life experience of this last week. I'm also a little older than people on the call. I have older children as well. And I've been thinking a lot this week of 9/11 and being outside the White House and trying to find out where my kids were. They were in elementary school at the time, my older kids, and having very tough conversations in those days about bad people that attacked America. And you have to have faith that there are more good people than bad people, and we have to get through this, and that you should not judge people in those cases. And again, back to the leadership question, look at what President George W. Bush did back in those days to tell the world and to tell people in America that, you know, Muslims are our brothers and our sisters and our neighbors, and they're wonderful. This is a group of people who hijacked a religion. And so leadership has its moments, right? And I'm not, and so it's incredibly hard for children. And, Nana, our son, has asked a lot of questions about this. I went home with him one of the nights in the middle when they came back in. He wanted to watch it because one of the differences between then and now is that smartphones didn't exist on 9/11 when my older children. It was a different technological era. You cannot shield your children from this. So you have to have conversations with them. And I don't want to violate his privacy, but it has been rattling. It's rattling for everybody, especially children who get good and bad, who get evil. And there are tough conversations that you never think you're going to be having with a 9-year-old in our case. But I think you just have to, trust in the faith and the inspiration that your children give you and remind them constantly there are way more good people than bad people. It doesn't seem that way sometimes, but hopefully we'll sort through it, strap in, and that their generation, when they get a chance, speak your mind, be fair. And the word I always come back to is respect. This town has lost its ability to respect the other side. The Republicans have lost the ability to stand up to somebody who is lying and say, stop lying. Lying has consequences. Lying about big things has consequences. And so it's tough with children. I get inspiration from, I'm sorry to ramble, but I get inspiration from his joy. It helps me get through it, I think, more than I help him get through it. But I think we have to spend a lot of time with children. We need to listen to them, listen to their questions to see what sinks in, because different kids do different things and different kids process in different ways. We need to listen.
I've only been a parent for 8.5 months, so I don't presume to give anyone parenting tips. I'm still learning a lot. I probably will never stop learning, but I will say this. John said, children get the difference between good and bad. And that is a crystal clear delineation in what we're experiencing right now. There is the right side of history of this and the wrong side of history of this. There is doing the right thing, and there's a clear example of doing the wrong thing. And no matter how large a group of people may be on the thing doing the wrong thing, reinforcing that message that there is in a moment always a choice between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing. And you see that on, I think, crystal clear display in what we've experienced in this country in the last week. And so it's an opportunity to reinforce what doing the right thing means.
Abby?
I know we're past time, but I just want to, I don't have kids, but I do have siblings who are actually much younger than me. And I remember when President Trump was elected to office, they were young enough that they had never known anything other than, Barack Obama's presidency. They didn't have any memories of anything other than that. And I think there was a time of real confusion about what that meant for this country. It was followed by Charlottesville, which I think was very traumatic for some of my younger siblings. And I think that one thing that I try to talk to them about as someone who loves history and also loves this country, the thing about the United States is that it's not a perfect place, not a perfect country, but the story of this country has been that good people have been able to move this country past its darkest times and past its darkest moments. And that if you give in to the darkness, there's no chance of getting through it. And it's only been when people have decided, I'm not going to accept this for what it is, that I think we've had some of the most powerful breakthroughs in the history of the modern world. When you look at, you know, the United States surviving the Civil War, you look at the Civil Rights Movement, good people standing up and not giving up makes a real difference. And so when people are confused about why things seem bad, and seem when sort of the wrong side seems like they're winning, they're really not winning, because if there are enough people who know the right thing to do and do the right thing, they have every time moved this country forward. And I think that we have to hold on to that. And I think you have to teach kids to read our history in that way and to understand our history in that way. It's not just that the US just kind of happens to kind of get to be a more perfect union. It's because people make it a more perfect union, and you have to have a role in that. And so, you know, that's what I try to tell my younger siblings and what I would tell my kids. And it's tough, but I think that it's not that this is not who we are. It's that sometimes when this is who we are, we have to decide that we don't want to be this anymore. And you have to do something about it. And so it's on you and on everyone to do the right thing. I think that's where we are as a country.
Yeah, and I will just close by saying, just kind of bringing all of your thoughts together, it is about the fact that this country is built on doing the right thing, and that is how the country has become, you know, the greatest in the world. And what we have seen over the last 4 years, but particularly the last 2 months, to John's point, is what happens when leaders don't lead, and when we all take for granted that we are just going to be okay and that we will get through it. Can't take it for granted. We have to make it so, everybody. And the pressure is on, and the responsibility is so great, and it is now crystal clear that that is the case. And when it comes to young people, just a bit of hope. I just got a text from our son's best friend, Jonah Hawk, who used his break in doing virtual school to tune into this. So the bad news is that young people saw what happened on Wednesday. The good news is that young people are really engaged, and that has to remain the case. Engaged more than ever before. So thanks, Jonah. Thank you all. And thank you so much for watching this morning. We are going to have a lot more to talk about. We're going to be right back here at 10 a.m. Eastern next Thursday, which of course is the day after Joe Biden is inaugurated as 46th president of the United States. Have a good day, everybody.
Girl. Hold on.